Hello everyone, in this video I'll be ranking all of the damage types in Baldur's Gate 3 on a tier list. Now there's 13 different damage types with 3 physical and 10 elemental damage types, and what I'll be ranking these on is not only the resistances that enemies have in the game, but also the effects based on gear, because some elemental damage types are actually buffed up quite a bit if you use specific gear, so I'll be taking all things into account on this tier list. And we're first going to start off with these physical damage types with slashing, bludgeoning, and piercing next. Slashing is unfortunately one of the worst because unlike the others, there's no way to increase the amount of damage that the enemy takes from slashing. So with bludgeoning, if there's a frozen enemy, they take double bludgeoning damage. With piercing, there's multiple ways that we can apply a vulnerability to piercing damage, whereas slashing doesn't really have that same luxury. You'll most commonly find slashing damage types on swords, scimitars, and some other things like glaives, but overall, it's one of the weaker damage types just because you can't really buff it up any other way. It is also resisted like all the other physical damage types quite a bit throughout the game, but I would say that it's not the worst or it's not the worst damage type in the game, just not really that beneficial. The only thing it really has going for it is if you're a half orc using a great axe, because if you hit a critical hit as an orc, you get an additional damage die, which is an extra 1d12 in this case. It's really the only good thing about slashing damage. Not really that many benefits, so we're actually just going to put slashing in the D tier. It's not as good, maybe C tier, not as good as some of the others. Now, into bludgeoning damage, some cool interactions. So like the Morning Frost, which is a staff you can get in Act 1, you can apply chilled on the target. And then also with encrusted with frost from different items like the Winter's Clutches here, and the Cold Brim Hat, which can apply 2 turns of encrusted frost if you hit a target with a spell. What this means is if you're going to use that, you can freeze a target. Now you do have to have both the statuses applied, both chilled and then also encrusted with frost. It kind of works weird because it'll freeze a target for 1 turn if you don't have encrusted with frost. It'll freeze them for 2 turns if you do. And in turn, it'll take double damage from bludgeoning, thunder, and force damage. Now, bludgeoning is going to be one of the most common damage types that we can deal. Even the Morning Frost itself, if you bonk somebody with this, it does bludgeoning. Things like hammers, great clubs, and other big, large, heavy weapons like that will deal bludgeoning damage. And also another nice thing about bludgeoning damage is early on in the game, you're going to fight a few skeletons. Skeletons are weak to bludgeoning damage, so it gives it a bit of an advantage over slashing, but it's also commonly resisted like other physical damage types. I wouldn't say it's that terrible of a damage type. I might just say it's around the B tier just because it does have the ability to get doubled. Somewhere's B to C tier, I would say. Just it has the ability to get enhanced. However, piercing damage is the best of them. And what's weird is I've actually seen a lot of tier lists around say piercing is one of the worst damage types because it is resisted early on in the game. Now, a little bit of context matters here. Piercing is going to be one of the weaker damage types until you make it to Act 3. And that's because once we get to Act 3, and unfortunately later on in Act 3, we can get items like the Orin's Dagger here, which when it's in your main hand, you get that exploit weakness, which whenever creatures are hit with this weapon, they receive vulnerability to piercing damage. This is a really good weapon because, yeah, if you stab somebody, they're going to be able to take extra piercing damage the next time that you are able to damage them. So you can see here, I unfortunately stabbed Will, but he has that aura of murder there, which means he's going to take a double piercing damage the next time we do an attack on him. So that's really nice because if you got a fighter with this weapon, you can do 1 attack and then they take double damage from him for the rest of the turn. So that can be pretty good. And the best light armor in the game, the ballist armor. Enemies within 3 meters become vulnerable to piercing damage unless they're immune to it. So yeah, this is really good. Now I also have to point out something. In patch 8, they actually increased it. It used to only be 2 meters of vulnerability. Now it's correctly changed to the 3 meters of vulnerability. Another thing, it says unless they're immune to it. What's funny is if they are immune to piercing damage, you can still apply this on them. So yeah, it's kind of misleading in what it does, but piercing damage, once you hit Act 3 and get either the ballist armor or Orin's Dagger, legitimately becomes one of the best damage types in the game. Another thing is you can use crossbows like the Hellfire Hand Crossbow, which does piercing damage. And if you have the Crossbow Expert feat and Sharpshooter, that'll allow you to do melee attacks with your crossbow and get an additional 10 damage from Sharpshooter, which is then turned into extra 20 damage. So you can actually make some close range Sharpshooter builds really effective using this. Another, I guess, side note here is there's only 3 weapons in the game that deal a different damage die. Nair Misser here, which does force damage, a Flame Blade, and then also the Shadow Blade, which does pure psychic damage. So that's a bit of a side topic. Piercing damage is extremely useful for the reason I mentioned there, being able to apply vulnerabilities to it, and it makes crossbows, bows, and everything really good. What I would recommend doing is having someone with a ballist armor, like your fighter or frontliner, go up and make a bunch of enemies vulnerable to the piercing damage. Then you can have your backline shoot at them with crossbows and they'll take double damage. So a lot of ways you can make piercing damage good. If it's early game, I would say, so Early game, piercing damage is C tier. It's just one of the more resisted damage types and not really that beneficial. But once we get to Act 3, those two specific items make this an S tier choice for damage. I might even just say A tier, somewhere around there. There's only a few damage types that we can double: lightning, cold damage, psychic damage, and piercing damage. So yeah, there's two easy ways to be able to apply vulnerability. If you're not with those two items, it is again C tier. But with those two items, it makes piercing extremely effective because it's such a common damage type that we can get, and it's going to deal extra damage. But now getting into fire damage. Now fire damage is a little bit interesting. There are items like the Pyro Quickness hat. Whenever you deal fire damage with a leveled spell, you get an extra bonus action. This can enable a sorcerer to be able to cast 3 spells per turn, so you can drop 3 fireballs with their Quicken spell doing 2 bonus action spells. There's also the Hat of Fire Acuity. Whenever you deal fire damage, you gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns. This is really good because Scorching Ray can then give you a plus 10 to your spell save DC. Fire, unfortunately, though, is one of the more commonly resisted damage types. So it does have a few items that can really buff it up, most notably 2 different hats in the game. And there's unfortunate that when we fight against devils, they're going to resist fire damage as well. Any tieflings resist fire damage. A lot of rangers will also resist fire damage. Pretty much anything that's on fire, which is a lot of things we fight, oddly enough, will resist fire damage as well. It's the, I would say, second most resisted damage type behind poison. And yeah, it's fun to use. You also got the Flame Blade there, which will do pure fire damage, which actually powers up our Hat of Fire Acuity. But at the end of the day, it does have its downfalls. Another thing with fire damage is you can get heat, which is something that will allow us to do a little extra damage. So you got the Ring of Self-Immolation. You can light yourself on fire and gain 2 stacks of heat. Take 1d4 of fire damage each turn, but can use the heat convergence. So here, consume your heat to do a powerful attack, and this will deal additional fire damage on your next attack. Now, I'll be honest, lightning charges, they're fun. Heat makes you take damage, and it's not really that good overall. If you're going to be using fire damage, it's going to likely just be because Fireball is a great spell, Scorching Ray is a great spell, or you want that extra Arcane Acuity or the extra bonus action. So fire does have those benefits, but second most resisted damage type in the game. So I would have to say, even with all those benefits, I'm just going to put it into the B tier because, yeah, it's extremely highly resisted, but it does give you extra bonus actions, Arcane Acuity, and a few other things too. So it does have some fun uses in different builds. However, it's, again, resisted a lot. Next up is Thunder, and Thunder's a really fun damage type for a variety of reasons. With Thunder, you can do things like using the Gloves of the Belligerent Skies here, and this will give the target reverberation, which makes it so that once you hit 7 stacks of this, it makes a target do it's 5 stacks, and once it hits 5 stacks, they have to do a 10 DC Constitution saving throw or be knocked prone. What's nice about this is you can actually apply this with a variety of different things, like radiant damage, so Spirit Guardians. If someone comes running at you, gets hit with this radiant damage, it can knock them prone with a reverberation. But the reason I'm mentioning reverberation is actually because of the Ring of Spiteful Thunder here, which when the wearer deals thunder damage to a reverberating creature, which means anyone that got hit with thunder damage and gets that from this, they will be dazed unless it succeeds a Constitution saving throw. What dazed means is the target has disadvantage on wisdom saving throws, meaning we're much more likely to hit them with command or hold person, 2 of the best spells in the game, and this also obviously pairs well with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel for bonus action abilities. There's also the Thunder Skin Cloak. Whenever the creature with reverberation deals targets damage to the wearer, they become, if they don't do the Constitution saving throw, they become dazed. But the big one here is the Ring of Spiteful Thunder. Thunder damage as a whole, as I mentioned, can also be doubled if the target's frozen, but it is kind of hard to set up frozen, and unlike bludgeoning damage, force damage doesn't always give that, or thunder damage doesn't always give that extra damage or vulnerability, so there's some usefulness, but I really think that the biggest benefits are stacking reverberation, which you can also use with the Boots of Stormy Clamor here, which it stacks up further reverberation. I like to use both of these together to really step things up in terms of the amount of the times that we can knock the target prone. They'll also take thunder damage if they get hit with the reverberation. But one big thing with thunder damage is the spell Silence, which makes targets immune to thunder damage. This is not a spell the enemies use a lot in the game, but it's something to keep in mind that if you got a powerful thunder spell like Thunder Wave, you can't do nothing if you're silenced, and if a target's in a silence zone, they can't be hit by it. So there are instances, if this was a PvP game, Thunder would be a lot worse, but since the enemy doesn't use silence often really at all, their AI, don't know why, doesn't really silence you, if you notice. Think about all the times you got silenced in your playthroughs of Baldur's Gate 3. Doesn't happen often. Yeah, so with that, there's also a nice hat that gives you increased Arcane Acuity as well. So the Hat of the Storm Scion's power, when the wearer deals thunder damage, they gain Arcane Acuity. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a Scorching Ray equivalent to this like we do with the Hat of Fire Acuity, which you can get max stacks of Fire Arcane Acuity using a level 3 spell slot. With this, yeah, tough luck. You can do your Thunder spells, Chromatic Orb. There's not a lot of Thunder spells in the game either, but I would say overall as a damage type, it does have a lot of benefits of applying Daze, Reverberation, and then also stacking Arcane Acuity. So Thunder builds are actually pretty viable. I would have to say Thunder is an A tier damage type just because of that. Watch out for being silenced and you'll have a good time with it. Next is Psychic damage. Now, this is a damage type that is crazy. I would actually say it's possibly one of the best damage types in the game. Patch 8 made it even better. Now, Resonant Stone. All nearby creatures are steeped with bliss. What this means, advantage on physical checks, disadvantage on mental saving throws. That's really huge. But the entity is vulnerable to psychic damage. So everyone in that radius is going to get the steeped with bliss. So you can see this here. When I walk there, it's a huge radius. Now Duke Alder Ravenguard is affected by it. So that's like 9-meter radius. It's huge. What that means is our Shadow Blade, I use a level 2 spell slot to cast this. It's a 2d8. If you're using a use a higher leveled spell slot like level 4, you can then get a 3d8. And then if you use a level 5 or level 6 spell slot, you get a 4d8 Psychic Shadow Blade. That is the highest damage that we can get in a weapon naturally in the game without using any cheats or exploits. Very strong. Very, very, very strong. So yeah, 4d8 times 2, that is some of the highest damage in the game. If you're using Shadow Blade with the Resonant Stone, you're going to be hitting huge numbers, easily able to hit over for a 100 damage with just a normal rain attack. So it's really good. I could go on and on about how powerful this is. Psychic damage also has the benefit of applying mental fatigue when you use the brain drain gloves. So this is really good because mental fatigue will give the target -1 to their mental saves. So they're much less likely to succeed on things like hold person, hold monster, etc. Psychic damage, I would have to say, is honestly, now that Shadow Blade is a spell that's accessible to the Blade Singing Wizard, the Warlock, etc., I would say it's probably the best damage type in the game. You can't beat a 4d8, because if you even have one of the best swords in the game, the Baldur Giant Slayer, that's a 2d6. So your low level Shadow Blade is higher damage, and then it can also become a 4d8. So yeah, Shadow Blade did change things really heavily in Baldur's Gate 3, obviously. This makes Psychic damage the best damage type in the game. Lightning and Cold are also very good, because they can also be doubled, but you don't have to set up with Shadow Blade. You literally just exist with the Resonant Stone. Once you hit Act 2, yeah, it's good. Psychic's also not commonly resisted unless you're going against Mind Flare, so be mindful. If you're going against a Mind Flare, you may want to drop the Resonant Stone. And also using the Resonant Stone, you have a more likely chance of getting hit with getting hit by any type of mental spell like Hold Person. However, on the opposite, you can also apply those conditions a lot more frequently using the Resonant Stone, so this is a good user if you have Shadow Blade to also have the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel for bonus action commands and Hold Person. But yeah, I could talk about psychic damage all day. Next, we'll get into one of the worst damage types with poison. Now, there is gear that's going to affect poison, and there's actually amulets that'll give you poison damage on your attacks whenever you get healed, which is a good way early game to deal a little extra damage. But like fire damage, it's commonly resisted. Now, there's also a ring that'll apply the virulent poison to the enemy, which makes them vulnerable to poison damage. However, this does take an action, so not really that great. Also, there's not that many poison spells in the game. The best poison spell being Cloud Kill. You also got Poison Spray, and yeah, there's not a lot. However, there is 3 pieces of gear that can buff up poison damage. There's one amulet that'll give you poison damage. At the end of the day, poison damage is the most resisted damage type, with a lot of things resisting it, and a lot of creatures also resisting it. So I'd have to say that poison is one of the weaker damage types. It doesn't have the cool effects like fire, like you can't stack Arcane Acuity with poison damage. You can't get an extra bonus action. So that's my justification, because fire damage is also commonly resisted. But the fire spells are much better, like Fireball, Scorching Ray, much better than Cloud Kill and Poison Spray. Also, poison is a condition which gives enemies disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks, so that is nice, and it does have you do have gloves that will apply the poison condition, but it's not very likely to land it, especially later on in the game. You're not likely to poison targets, but it's not the worst damage type in the game. It's just not that great. And next up is Radiant damage. So this is the Cleric and Paladin damage type, very common because smites will deal radiant damage. And what's again nice about radiant damage, similar to Gloves of Belligerent Skies, will also allow you to stack reverberation with it, which is nice because you can use this with to apply the reverberation. But also there's things like the Luminous Armor, which you can get in Act 1, one of the best, honestly I would say the best uncommon item in the game. It gives you the radiant shockwave. Whenever the wearer deals radiant damage, they cause a radiant shockwave, which creates a 3-meter radius where you apply radiating orbs to everybody. Radiating orbs will give the target a -1 to their attack roll for every stack with a maximum of 10 stacks. So that's a -10 to their attack rolls. If they have disadvantage, they're likely not going to hit you whatsoever. This is really good, great on a light cleric because they can pop Spirit Guardians, run around applying the radiating shockwaves. There's also a lot of gear in the game that'll apply radiating orbs alongside this. This is if you're lit up. There's a Callous Glow Ring. Whenever targets are illuminated, you deal additional 2 points of damage against them, which you can illuminate them with the radiating orbs. So there's a lot of really good ways to apply radiating orbs in the game. And also there's helmets, which will actually, something really good is the Holy Lance Helm. So whenever a creature misses with an attack roll against the wearer, must do a dexterity saving throw or take 1 to 4 radiant damage. So if they miss you, they can keep applying the radiating orbs. It's actually kind of crazy. Now that is the biggest benefit of radiating damage. Let's get into the downsides. There's a lot of fights in the game which have the Radiant Retort, most notably the Sharans, whenever you fight them in Act 3, and even Raphael, who will return radiant damage in your face. And trust me, it's not fun, because it can basically, if you go in for a smite and you get a critical, bonk, it's right in your face. So for that, it makes radiant damage risky in some fights, but as long as you know what you're doing, and using the Necrotic Spirit Guardians and just not taking your Paladin to those fights, radiant damage is really good. It's I see some tier lists ranking it the absolute best damage type, and that's a hard disagree for me. I would say that it's possibly like top of the B tier, but I'm actually going to put it into the A tier just because light domain clerics are so powerful with the ability to apply -10 to the enemy's attack rolls. And also with patch 8, there's the Crown Paladin who also gets Spirit Guardians at level 9. And once you take the Paladin to level 11, they get a 1d8 on their main hand attacks. So that can further stack radiating orbs with radiant damage. Again, you just got to be mindful when to use it. If you're going against the Sharans, this is the F tier. It's even lower than that. But for the most part, it's a really good damage type because of the extra statuses you can apply on the enemies. And it also applies radiating or reverberation. So you can have someone built around applying radiating orbs, reverberation. There's even the Luminous Gloves. I forgot to mention this a bit earlier, but whenever you deal radiant damage, the target receives 2 turns of radiating orbs. So you can pair that with the Luminous Armor and then the helmet that gives you the radiant damage whenever attacker misses. And then on top of that, Boots of Stormy Clamor, which will further apply reverberation because radiating orb is considered a condition to stack this. You got something cool going there. So yeah, that's my justification for radiant damage in the A tier. I wouldn't say, I've seen some others again that put it up in the S tier. I would not put it up in the S tier. It does have its downfalls. There are some enemies that are also resistant to radiant damage, but when you're in Act 2, radiant damage is possibly one of the best damage types because shades are also vulnerable to radiant damage, so they'll take double radiant damage. But next up, speaking of shades, a lot of enemies actually resist necrotic damage. Now, necrotic damage is kind of boring. Now, with the Death Domain Cleric in patch 8, things have changed because once they get to level 8, they get an Inescapable Destruction. And what Inescapable Destruction does is it allows you to ignore resistances to necrotic damage, which is pretty good. There's also a necrotic version of Spirit Guardian, so that's another fun thing you can do is you can always pop up your necrotic version anytime that you can't use radiant damage there. That's still pretty good. They also have a cool like green glow to them. The only downside to necrotic damage is, again, it's, I would say, the 3rd most resisted damage type. Fire and poison are the most commonly resisted, but there's a lot of things in the game that will resist any type of your necrotic damage, so that does take things, I have to take that into account. There's also not really any gear at all in the game that benefits necrotic damage, but I will toss it a bone because necrotic damage is now able to ignore resistances thanks to the Death Domain Cleric. And another fun thing, one of my favorite multi-classes in patch 8 is taking 6 levels of the Blade Singing Wizard, 6 levels of the Death Domain Cleric, so you can ignore resistances to necrotic damage. And also with the Wizard, you can learn Circle of Death, which is a large area of effect spell that can deal a ton of damage. So while it's not the most powerful spell in the game, it does an 8d6, which is upwards of 48 damage. Look at the radius on that. So pour a star in there. It's crazy the large size that it hits. And this can also apply radiating orbs if you have specific gear like the Coruscation Ring. If you're illuminated, you apply radiating orbs on every enemy with that. So a cleric with the Circle of Death from the Blade Singing Wizard can be actually a force to be reckoned with. So for that reasoning, I will put necrotic damage above poison damage. Maybe even, nah, I would have to say, because you can't make targets vulnerable to necrotic damage like you can with bludgeoning. So, and it's also more resisted than bludgeoning damage, I would say. And yeah, it's great on a Blade Singing Wizard, multi-class with the Death Domain Cleric, which I do have a build on my channel if you're curious, because it's pretty fun being able to apply radiating orbs to a bunch of targets and then also at the same time ignore resistances and hit a lot of them with that. And also another thing I guess for necrotic damage is one of the coolest weapons in the game, in my opinion, is the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. So creatures will have disadvantage on saving throws against your necromancy spells, which Circle of Death counts as a necromancy spell, so they'll have disadvantage on the save, more likely to get hit. But the Life Essence Harvest, this is where it actually makes necrotic damage pretty good. And if we take this into consideration, I actually might move this up a tier. So the Staff of Cherished Necromancy, if you take out a hostile creature with a spell, you seal its Life Essence. Life Essence lets you cast a necromancy spell for free. So if you have the Staff of Cherished Necromancy equipped, you can do a Circle of Death, take out a creature, get its Life Essence back, do a Circle of Death. It does have a bit of a charge. It says until their next long rest. You can actually continually keep doing this. And if you pair this with the Necromancer Wizard, you get 18 health points back if you take out a creature with the Circle of Death. So yeah, that actually makes necrotic damage. I might actually move that up to the B tier just because of that one instance, I guess. And again, the Death Domain Cleric did kind of provide a bit of a boost. So maybe even like the B tier, just because if you wanted to do a full necrotic damage playthrough, the Death Domain Cleric and Blade Singing Wizard, you're going to have a better time than a full bludgeoning damage playthrough, I suppose. But next, we got lightning damage. One of my favorite damage types in the game. I'm leaving my true favorite for the last, but lightning damage also stacks reverberation. Lightning charges are a thing that you can get pretty easily in the game. In Act 1, you get a few different ones that will give you lightning charge. So when the wearer deals damage with a spell or cantrip, they gain 2 lightning charges. So this becomes pretty good. So with lightning charges, lightning courses through, you have a +1 to attack rolls and deal an additional 1 lightning damage. If you gain 5 charges, they're consumed the next time you deal damage, and you deal an additional 1d8 of lightning damage, you lose 1 charge per turn. The bonus to attack rolls is really nice, and that boosts up lightning. However, the best reason for using lightning damage is actually because there's a fun spell called Create Water. And this will actually allow you to deal double damage, similar to if you're using the cold damage. What this does is Create Water will just create a puddle of water, which makes everyone in it vulnerable. Now, this actually doesn't aggro people, so you can do this at any time. It's kind of funny. But whenever a target is wet there, they are prevented from burning, resistant to fire damage, but vulnerable to cold and lightning damage. This becomes crazy because if you apply, let's say you're a Tempest Domain Cleric multi-class with a wizard to get Chain Lightning. You can drop Create Water, and then on your next turn, you can then use Chain Lightning from the wizard, which will do a guarantee. Thanks to the Tempest Domain's Channel Divinity, the Destructive Wrath, you can roll the max damage, which is normally 80 on Chain Lightning, but it'll be doubled to 160 because of the Create Water, creating that vulnerability. Being able to guarantee 160 damage is insane, and that makes it one of the best damage types in the game. Lightning charges aside, just being able to do the Create Water and blast with that. You also have some decent mid-game spells like Call Lightning, Lightning Bolt being a really powerful spell as well, but the big thing is the Channel Divinity. So again, with the Destructive Wrath, when you roll thunder or lightning damage, you can use your Channel Divinity to deal maximum damage instead. I would typically just use this on Chain Lightning if you can, Lightning Bolt, any type of lightning spell. There's also the Destructive Wave from the Cleric too, which is good for this, but you're going to see here, we hit for a guaranteed 60 with a level 3 spell. That's not even that crazy strong because you can continually keep casting it each turn. That makes it very powerful and pretty crazy overall. So yeah, lightning damage, I'm going to put it just below psychic damage because it does require more. With psychic damage, you can just go in and deal psychic damage doubled with the Resonant Stone, but lightning, you do have to set it up with Create Water. And next up is acid damage, which is an interesting damage type. Now, as far as acid goes, there's only like Acid Splash, the cantrip, Melf's Acid Arrow, Chromatic Orb. Not a lot of acid spells in the game. You can turn into the Dilophosaurus if you're a druid and do a Corrosive Spit. And the big thing is the acid surfaces, which is not, you don't have to do acid damage. You can also take a vial of acid, watch out, Scratch. We're going to do something that you're not going to want to be near. So you can throw that, create an acid surface. And with that acid surface, it makes the target have a -2 to their overall armor class, which is nice because you can reduce or increase your hit chance against them. There's also acid arrows, acid barrels that you can use, but the big thing with acid damage is reducing the armor class of the target. Now, acid damage is less commonly resisted than other damage types, so for that, it's pretty decent. And yeah, overall, I guess we could say that that's probably like, it's less resisted than necrotic, but you can't, if anything's resistant to it, which there's things like slimes, which are necrotic damage, we can ignore resistances and also have a really good spell with Circle of Death. There's no real great acid damage spell. There's also, I guess, Hunger of Hadar, but the damage that you do with Hunger of Hadar is not super high. I'm gonna actually put the bludgeoning damage down because this does require a lot of setup to get double damage compared to acid damage, which is just plain old better, I guess. But next up is force damage. So force. As mentioned, there's a weapon that deals pure force damage, and what's also cool about this is if, let's say you have Hunter's Mark on the target, it makes them take an additional 1d6 of the weapon's damage type. This will apply an additional 1d6 of force from Nair Misser, or if you're using Shadowblade, it'll do it 1d8 or 1d4 or 1d6 of psychic damage, but force damage is not commonly resisted. Gortash is the only one from my memory that I can think of that is vulnerable to or resistant to force damage. So it's a really good damage type because it's the least resisted damage type. But it does have its downfalls because it's only limited to a few different spells, despite being really good spells. So we have things like Magic Missile, which is guaranteed damage, does 3d4, and it guarantees the hit. We also have Eldritch Blast from our Warlocks, which is nice. So Eldritch Blast also gets to add your Charisma modifier if you take the, and also can do a pushback if you take the Invocations from the Warlock. Force damage just being useful because it ignores a lot of resistances. There's also Gloves that'll add an additional 1d10 of force damage to your attacks. The Gloves of Soul Catching, which monks can do twice with a flurry of blows. That's an additional 2d10 of force damage, which is great. There's also the Disintegrate spell, but I honestly would just not recommend using that spell. It's not that great compared to things like Chain Lightning for a level 6 spell slot. But force is the least commonly resisted damage type. I would want to say S tier. I think I previously said it was an S tier choice for damage. But there's no way to really enhance it outside of freezing a target. I'm still just going to put it in the S tier, though. It's great for the reason that it doesn't get resisted often. But next up, and finally, we have cold damage, which is my favorite damage type in the game because there's a lot of items that will actually enhance cold damage. Like previously mentioned, the Morning Frost, which will make it so that you deal additional cold damage and apply chilled. Now, what's great about chilled is chilled makes the target vulnerable to cold damage. So they'll take double cold damage whenever you deal cold damage. So yeah, that in itself is pretty crazy. So if we go ahead here, that's going to take him out. So we hit Halson with Ray of Frost, reducing his movement speed, but chilled. The affected entity is vulnerable to cold damage and resistant to fire damage. So if you're able to chill a target, you can then follow that up with another cold spell and it's going to deal double damage. So the Morning Frost is crazy. Yeah, that was 14 off a cantrip. It's only a 1d8 and we hit for 14. That just goes to show how strong that is. We rolled a 7 and it doubled it. Cold damage is also good because as you saw there, Silly Goose Halson is slipping on the floor because we can also use the Snowburst Ring, which when the wearer deals cold damage, they create a 4.5 meter circle of ice around the target. So this is good too because you don't even have to have water set up and you can just go, there is water on the ground there, I'm aware, but normally you could just cast that and it'll create that ice surface there and then everyone goes and slips and falls. One thing about slipping and falling is when the enemy does that, it breaks their concentrations, it ends their turn. So if they're a fighter running to get you hit you with a weapon, they're going to end their turn. If it's a spellcaster, it's got a concentration on a hold person, goodbye hold person. That in itself is really good. I'm a huge fan of cold damage because of all the fun you can do with it. Also, if you throw the Snowburst Ring on a giant barbarian, at level 6, they can use their elemental cleaver to add cold damage to their weapon. So you can throw your weapon and create ice pockets on the ground. And then if you have something like the Disintegrating Nightwalkers, you can't slip on ice. There's also the Hoarfrost Boot, so I'd recommend having 2 of your team members have that. You can create a bunch of ice surfaces, which is going to be a valid form of crowd control. Ice Storm is also a really good spell that you can hit enemies with. There's also Cone of Cold, one of the most powerful damage spells in the game. And then also things like Odaluk's Freezing Sphere for the wizard, but you can also learn it from a scroll. If you take a cold sorcerer and take a single level of the wizard, you can learn that from a scroll. And also Wall of Ice, which got buffed in patch 8. So cold damage, I would actually have to say, it's just so good. Because of those surfaces that it makes, Wall of Ice getting the major buff to now make the aura that it leaves behind once it breaks now deals proper damage, making it actually a really effective choice. Cold damage is crazy. Yes, with lightning damage, you can get lightning charges. You can also stack reverberation. But cold damage has those ice surfaces, which are just so good. So with that, there's a lot of S tier damage types. As mentioned, I could probably put force damage down a bit just because piercing damage, I guess in this recap, piercing damage is good once you get 2 particular items, the Orin's Dagger and the Ballast Armor. If you don't have those items, it's possibly like a D tier choice. But with them, being able to apply a vulnerability to a common damage type on crossbows, on your daggers, your rapiers, many other types of weapons, extremely good. Psychic damage is now the king. Resonant Stone plus Shadowblade, 48. I can't say anything else about Shadowblade. You know how good it is. Cold damage because of the extra statuses. You can chill targets super easily with the Morning Frost. So it's viable, You can be a cold sorcerer in literally like level 4, level 5, and it's viable. The nice thing with Morning Frost is it also gives you a Ray of Frost, which scales off your casting stat. So if you're a cleric, you can do cold damage without really much worry as a cantrip. Lightning damage, again, very good for being able to be doubled, and there's a lot of conditions that can apply off lightning. And piercing damage, for the reason I mentioned, you got 2 items that will create vulnerabilities. Force, least resistant damage type. Thunder, commonly not resisted, and lots of benefits from buffing it up with gear. And radiant damage is good, but you have to be careful in a lot of situations. Fire damage, extra bonus action, extra arcane acuity with Scorching Ray, stacking a +10 to your spell save DC. And for those that aren't aware, normally we're at a low level here. We only have a 13 spell save DC. +10 to that almost doubles our spell save DC. So our spells are extremely likely to land if you got arcane acuity. So that makes fire damage actually pretty useful. Necrotic, thanks to the Death Domain Cleric, boosted out of the C tier. Acid damage, not bad at all. And then bludgeoning, it does require some setup, but can be good. Also good against skeletons. Poison, resisted often. And slashing, nothing special there. So let me know your thoughts on this tier list, and hit the subscribe button below if you haven't already. I hope you have an incredible day, and we'll see you all in the next video.